right, started recording.
All right. Hello, welcome. This is the weekly meeting, the volume for the Kubernetes storage SIG to talk about volume populators. So last week, I mentioned that I'm now back to working on this, like this is my primary activity. And so I've made a lot of progress in the last week, including I rewrote the validating webhook as a Kubernetes controller using the same CRD, and I tested that and pushed up a new PR. Actually, I should find that PR and link it here, but it's there on the external Populators website or repo. I also did another revision of the Hello Populator sort of sample that uses the new design, and I made some changes to that code, and I'm cleaning it up. It's not yet at the point where we can like split it into a library in a reusable part, but so that's the next main coding activity. I did find a bug in external provisioner that we'll talk about today, but one of the things I noticed that that I wanted to bring here to this group was there's just a lot of places where we have to give this thing a name. There's a bunch of things that need naming, and I wanted to. I wish we had Saad around to have this discussion. So we may have to postpone the final decisions on names until next week. But I at least wanted to like collect a list of all of the things that need to have names and to talk about the potential options we have in those areas. So hold on, I'm just bringing up the code here. I'll take 2 seconds to load this up. I'm on the wrong branch, that's why. Okay, data populator controller. Okay. All right, so what did I do with my agenda doc? So the things that need to have names that are going to be user facing are one, the CRD itself. Today, this is called volume populator, I think. Volume populator. And this is the CRD that is the way that an actual populator registers what group and kind it will handle. And that the controller will look at these CRs when it sees a PVC with a data source to see if it's a valid one or not. So I've gone with the name volume populator here. We can suggest different alternatives. But this is something that we need to sort of agree on as a group. The name of the controller, my working name has just been Populator Controller, but that seems like a really weird name. So I wanted to sort of discuss with you guys, for this sort of central controller that will be looking at all the PVCs and generating events on the ones that don't have data sources that match something that will probably get populated. What should we call this? Next on the list, so let me write down here. This is called Populator Controller right now, and I'm not thrilled with that name.
Maybe
I don't have a
just a
better one.
volume populator to be just volume populator, just don't have the controller. I mean,
Well, so the thing is that this
OR.
controller doesn't actually do any population at all. Its job is to sort of watch PVCs and data sources and give you warnings when they don't appear to match a populator. So the problem is, maybe I should draw a picture of this. I don't have a picture yet. In the eventual configuration, what we expect to have is, in addition to all your other CSI drivers and Kubernetes core controllers, you're going to have an actual populator, which will be a standalone controller delivered by, potentially a third party, which will, be a full-blown Kubernetes controller watching PVCs and doing stuff in response to that. There will be this populator controller, which will be presumably supplied by the Kubernetes distro, which will be generating the events, and um,
How about data source controller?
data source controller. That might be a better name. Let me write it down here. Data dash source dash controller, so possible name. Yeah, like I want to think through, like, we would like this to communicate what it actually does without preventing us from extending its function in the future if we can think of more centralized functions we want to have this thing perform. The key is that, populators are going to be singletons in the cluster. Well, I mean, sorry, I shouldn't say that. There will be one populator per object type that could be a data source. So you could have potentially multiple populators, but it'll be one per data source type, not one per CSI driver. This populator controller or data source controller should be a singleton across the entire cluster. And then you may also have multiple CSI drivers with, one per storage platform that supports dynamic provisioning. And so I want to sort of help people, if in very complicated configurations, I'd like to help people keep straight what is what. So I like data source controller. I don't know if it's too specific, but we can think about it. Um, so the other things that needed naming were all the various RBAC objects that get installed when you install this thing. Where did I put that stuff? Deploy populator controller. Yeah, so right now it's just called populator controller, RBAC dash populator dash controller, and setup dash populator dash controller, and everything is called populator controller all the way down. So that if we rename the name of the controller itself, we'd probably want to go update all these installation related things, but the names here could just match. And then the fourth thing was the event source. So this is when you actually create a PVC and populate and put something in the data source field which doesn't match an existing populator, this controller will generate an event with, and events have sources. And if I remember correctly, I think, yeah, right here, I called it, again, populator controller is the source of the event. And the specific event type that gets generated is called unrecognized data source kind. Um, so that's also sort of up for debate for what we would like to call this, but none of this is super high priority. This, in alpha, we can pick a name and we could always change it later on. But I did just want to sort of raise this up to the group that we do need to, I do want to get some sort of blessing on these names, I guess. That's what I'm looking for, so that I'm not just making stuff up. Um, let me pop this into the agenda doc so we know it needs to be covered. Event reason. Oops. How do I paste without formatting? Paste without formatting. What? I don't know what this means. Oh, okay, there we go. So I don't know if there's no other ideas along these lines. I'm just gonna try to come up with a comprehensive list of things that we need to name. I do like the idea of data source controller. I'm just gonna have to think about whether that's really clear enough, because it's not controlling any data sources. It's but maybe the word controller is the wrong word. Maybe data source verifier or data source checker. I don't know, because it's not really a controller in the sense that it does a lot of work. It's just a controller in the sense that it watches objects and then spits out events when it sees ones that don't match. Okay, so if there's no other ideas on that topic, we'll move on to the next subject, which was duplicate events. So I had a conversation with Elliot last week about apparently the way that most controllers work is every time they see something that they don't like, or every time that they see something that would generate an event, they just keep emitting the same event over and over again. And so the upshot of that is when you do like a kubectl describe PVC, you'll see like events will be repeated like 10 times, 20 times, 30 times. So what happens with the populator controller in its current implementation is every time the PVC gets updated, it gets re-added to the populator controller's queue, and the same event keeps getting spit out over and over again. And I didn't know if that was a problem. It seems to be a pattern that other controllers follow, where they just keep spitting out the same events, and then the Kubernetes API server coalesces those events into one, and so they don't worry about it. But it will be possible, conceivably, to sort of store, keep some state in memory inside the controller to know whether we had already emitted the event for a given PVC, and then to suppress future events of the same kind. I don't know if anybody had an opinion on that. Shing, do you know if anywhere else we attempt to remember that we have sent an event and then not send it again?
I think in the snapshot controller, we do some checks, and if it's the same as before, then we don't log event. I think there's some logic like that. Maybe you can take a look and see if that works for this.
Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe offline we can try to find a reference to that if you have a link to some
Yeah.
code or a particular event where you think that's happening, and I can sort of track down how that's being done, because the main question is there even any benefit to adding that extra code? You know, or could it be harmful? That's the other thing. Is it possible that we could have emitted the event in the past, but somehow the event got cleared, and then if we don't emit it again, it'll get forgotten about?
Yeah, it will be, I forgot what is the default, 1 hour or something, it will be clear. So
Oh, so
there's a default, the event doesn't,
Kubernetes will age off the events after a while.
yeah, the event will be gone after a certain amount of time, yeah.
Hmm. Well, that sort of argues then to keep the existing behavior where we just, every time the PVC gets
That's fine,
updated,
yeah,
if the data
depending on
source is still
how
not
open,
correct.
how often that shows up. This is like if it fails, and then just keep
Well,
repeating the same event.
the way the watcher works is any change to the PVC causes it to get requeued. And
Mhm.
then every time it gets requeued, we go evaluate the data source, and look at the all the CRs for volume populators, and if none of them match, uh, then it will re-emit the event. So like I've seen cases where, over the course of an hour you'll get 20 copies of this event,
Mhm.
um, which but there's also 20 copies of other events too, so maybe it's not a big deal. um, I don't know.
Can I? Sorry, I'm new here, so
Hey,
I'm sorry
welcome,
if I.
Sean.
I'm sorry if I don't know know the answer to this question. But if the volume populator is not found for that given data source, does that fail um, any portion of like the pod creation for that given?
No, well, what will happen is the same thing that happens today, which is if you can construct a PVC that points at a snapshot that doesn't exist, and of course, because it's a snapshot, it will be allowed, but nothing will validate that a snapshot with that name exists. So what will happen in that case is the clone from snapshot will fail, and the PV will just not get created, and the PVC will remain unbound, and therefore any pod that refers to that PVC will be unable to start, and it'll just sit there waiting. And then, of course, if later on you do create a snapshot with that name, all of a sudden the snapshot, or the external provisioner will see that snapshot, go ahead and clone it, create your PV, bind the PVC, your pod will start up, and you'll be ready to go. So you can end up in this state where you're basically waiting. And the same thing will happen here. If you point to a if you point a PVC at a data source for which there is no populator, you'll get events saying, hey, there's no populator, nothing's going to happen. But then if somebody later installs the populator, then all of a sudden the PVC can get created, the PV can get created, the PVC can get bound, and then the pod can get started.
And presumably, a pod could then go into a complete failure state, right, with the timeout. If we waited too long to create the snapshot or create the volume.
I don't know. I mean, if there's some higher level controller that created the pod and is waiting for the pod to get started and has a timeout, yes, I suppose that could trigger. But under normal circumstances, like if it's just a naked pod, it'll just sit there waiting for eternity until the PVC becomes bound. So the failure mode, if there is no populator, is the PVC just remains unbound. But other than that, you don't get anything. What this controller adds is it adds an event that tells you why it's unbound in case you're inspecting it as a human to sort of see what's going on. But the machine is going to behave exactly as it does today. It'll just sit there and wait.
Yeah, I was just asking to see if maybe we wanted to talk about adding some sort of condition on the volume populator, or I'm sorry, on the PVC or something to let somebody know across time, basically, because like we were saying, the events will eventually die, and I create my pod, it does the thing, and over an hour we don't get a requeue, and now I don't know why it's failing. But
so the behavior is supposed to closely match like cloning a PVC from another PVC or cloning a PVC from a snapshot, and those are existing workflows. And so the hope is that when we have population from arbitrary CRDs, that the user experience is identical, where you just point your new PVC data source at some other CRD, and then it behaves the same as if you cloned a snapshot or a volume, as far as the semantics with the the binding and pod starting up. So if there are already conditions on PVCs related to that, then we would want to use those. But I don't think that there are. I think it's the regular the regular life cycle of unbound and then bound and then lost.
It will just be events. Yeah, you just look at events, I think.
Well, and the phase, the PVC phase is the key thing, because it'll be stuck pending in the unbound phase or the pending phase. Thank you, and then it will become bound at the appropriate time, and that's sort of the signal to any consumer of that PVC that now I can start. Yeah, I think conditions sort of came on the scene after this PVC phase existed, and maybe we would have done it differently if things had happened in a different order, but we're not going to change that part of the code.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be the condition right now. It's only used for like volume expansion. So it's supposed to trigger something, right? So but we are not really triggering anything. This is just it's like any other, even without data source, right? If for some reason,
well, I think that the purpose of conditions in Kubernetes is that you can wait for them and find out the moment that they occur. And that is a property.
Condition is used for trigger the action, right? Like the only thing I know that is used is for volume expansion condition for the.
Right. But that's just because of we didn't have conditions at the time the PVC phase was invented. Like the PVC phase probably would be the kind of thing we would want to have a condition. So you could have a condition that says, PVC becomes bound, PVC becomes lost as conditions. But just for legacy reasons, we don't do that. We just have
that's exactly what I was thinking, was that there was like a condition for unbound, and then the reason would be unknown volume populator or something. But
yeah. So for legacy reasons, we don't have that, and we don't intend to add it. But we're just going to match the semantics of the other data sources.
Yeah, thank you for walking me through it. Thank you.
Okay.
I should probably have done my research more, but thank you.
No, this is what the meeting is for, is to bring people up to speed and sort of clear up confusion. And if I have any confusion, to help me get my head straight. So thank you. Okay, so duplicate events, we're not going to do anything. Not a problem. I think we're happy with the situation there. So the handling of conflicting populators, I wanted to sort of bring this one up again. So it is the case that the CRD, the volume populator CRD, has a name to identify the CR, and then a group and a kind, which is sort of the group and kind for which the populator understands. Now, it's possible to have two different volume populators, CRs, with different names, but the same group and kind. And the existing controller doesn't care, just as long as it finds one.
Collision, saying it's like collision. It's like collision. They don't know, or it's just.
It's effectively a collision, but I mean, it doesn't cause any problems. So like, because the only case where we look at the volume populator is in this controller to decide whether to emit the event or not, as long as there is an instance of a CR that matches a group in kind for a given data source, it will not emit the event. So if you did have two of them, it would just find the first one and it would say, oh, there's a populator, I'm done. And then if you removed that CR for that populator and there was another one, it would just find the other one and it would still be happy.
So
I had considered.
We probably just log an event then if there's another one that we are going to skip.
Well, we don't do anything at all. So I was gonna say the options are like we could. I think we discussed this before. We could have a full validating webhook for the volume populator CRDs themselves to actually reject duplicates, but like that's a lot of work to solve a non-problem or a very,
Well,
very
just saying like we don't do that, but instead just to log an event so that people are, at least they have something to.
So we could have a log message written to the log of this populator controller or data source controller. If we create a proper Kubernetes event, where would it go? Like onto the CRs?
Normally it's in both, normally it's in both, right? You log it and also you report an event. Event, of course, eventually it's going to go away, but log will be there.
So like you're saying periodically we scan the list of populators that are registered. If we find any duplicates, we would send an event to each of the duplicates and log a message explaining that we found some duplicates. Because that'll require another watcher loop and stuff inside this controller, but it's not a bad idea. I just want to
event. So like, where do we want to? Yeah, so we need to report event on an object, right? So where would that be? So
it would be on the CRs for the populators, right?
I actually wonder, like for this one, that like something similar in external provider, like they have conflict provider for the same type of the volume. I'm not sure they solve this problem.
So wait, Elliot, you have a weird echo, so it's kind of hard to hear you. But
could
you explain what you mean?
So, like when you say this kind of conflict populators, I'm thinking about similar case like conflict provider, like two provider handling the same of the volume provisioning. I wonder like how they solve this problem there.
That's actually a good question.
Yeah, I'm not sure they really solve this because based on I'm not sure based on my experience, it's just who come first, who take this volume.
Yeah, as I think about it, I think, yeah, if you had two different provisioners installed that both thought that they were going to provision for the same PVC, they're just going to race and one of them's going to win.
Yeah.
And the other one is going to end up creating a bogus volume and possibly leaving garbage behind it. Xing, is that your understanding?
Yeah, I actually don't know how that is solved currently.
Okay.
We'll probably need
I think it's solved by saying don't do that.
I don't know if there is already there might be already a way to solve this problem, right? It's probably already there. We don't know. We probably
well, I mean, so in CSI, the way it's supposed to work is that you have a storage class, and then the CSI provisioner name is in the storage class, so that every PVC has a storage class. Every storage class has a CSI provisioner name, and then the only way you could get into trouble is if you had two different controllers installed that both thought they had the same provisioner name, right? Then they would race with each other. As long as each one has a unique name, you're fine. The problem is I don't think anything prevents you from installing two different controllers with the same provisioner name, other than maybe just the naming of the controllers themselves. Maybe so, like, if you install NetApp's Trident, we name our pods a certain way, and if you try to like install another copy, it will see that it's already there and it won't install it again. So maybe as long as everybody has a scheme like that, where the provisioner for a given CSI provisioner name has particular pod names and particular namespaces and such, that's enough to sort of avoid a situation where you have two of them installed, because it'll.
Yeah, if it's the same namespace, I don't think you can, right? It's
right, exactly. If the same namespace, same pod name.
If you try different namespace, that might work. Yeah, that's probably okay.
Yeah. So but coming back to the populators, yeah, well, we could in principle have this problem where you could have, for whatever reason, two different populators that were trying to act on the same CRD, or just one populator that somehow got installed twice, you're going to have all those same problems over again. And I don't know what we can do to avoid trouble there. This was mostly just aimed at, you know, what do we do down in this controller if we notice the multiple conflicting CRs. And I like the idea of logging an event, or writing a log message and then sending events to the CRs themselves, so that a human can see what's going on. But I don't think it'll make a big difference implementation-wise unless we have an actual way to prevent people from having multiple pods running that are trying to populate the same group kind objects. So yeah, that'll be something to think about, is what can we do to sort of avoid mistakes and accidents there. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I can write down the notes for this later. The last thing I had on today's agenda was I ran into a bug in external provisioner. I misspelled it here. And Shing, I think you looked at this, didn't you?
Yeah, I think I added some comments. I don't know if there was anything else after I added my comments, because I think it's we should not return. I don't think we should return error in this case. We probably can take a look of the in-tree PV controller. It actually, you know, if it sees something is handled by a external plugin, it logs a message saying, okay, this is waiting for this plugin to provision or something. It doesn't really return an error. So I think we should do something similar.
Well, okay, so here's the actual code in an external provisioner. So there's a big old switch statement around the data source kind. This is where it looks, if it's a snapshot, it validates that the group is correct, and if not, you get an actual error here returned, because it's the snapshot name but not the snapshot API group. If it's a PVC, it just proceeds. And if it's anything else, what used to exist here is it used to always return an error. And then I don't know, Shing, if you added this few lines of code.
I think I probably fix. Yeah, because if you return an error, then how can this be handled by an external data populator? This is always kind of treated as an error, right? You don't want this one to be treated as an error.
I think you do, and so I wanted to sort of talk through it here in the meeting. So for the PVC that has the data source that is not a snapshot or a PVC, you don't want the external provisioner to do anything. In fact,
you should not return the error either, because if you return error, it's going to keep queuing and return the error over and over again, which is not right.
I actually thought that errors returned out of this function were treated as final, and it didn't retry.
I
think it will because be
trying.
I thought I checked, because you saw my PR. I actually implemented a change where it does return an error, and when I started using that fix.
Did you see Yang's message? Because he will be most familiar with how this will.
I think there is another library that this external provisioner use.
Yeah.
So if error is near, they will use that PV.
Yeah. So Jan's message, it does match what.
It says be confused.
So the issue there is there's multiple events that get emitted, but the behavior is correct. So if I go back to the code, I'm trying to find the thing that actually does this. It's in this library here. This call to control.provisioner.provision. If the error is not nil, then it goes into this code block, and I think it stops. It returns provisioning finished and an error, and then it stops doing anything with that volume, which is the intended behavior here. We want external provisioner to say, I am done with this PVC. I am not going to complete its provisioning because I don't know how. And then the actual populator will go create a second PVC that this thing will act on, and then and then the provisioner will do the rest of the work to rebind the PV back to the original PVC. So returning an error does get us the behavior we want.
Actually, I did this before. What I did is I returned a ignored error that defined in the library. So it will reach the first block in this arrow.
Which block?
The beginning of this arrow. At the beginning, still. If error is ignored error, then it just no off. So that's what I did before.
Okay, so you're saying if I return an instance of this or subclass of ignored error, then this thing will just ignore it, but it will still give the same behavior. It'll return provisioning finished. It will do an info level log, and then it'll stop working, which is the behavior we desire.
I think so. Yeah.
And then the remaining question is this event right here, where we say waiting for volume to be created by external data populator. So this error or this message sounds similar to the one that the populator controller is also emitting when it sees, although it will only emit the message if this doesn't match, or if the data source group kind doesn't match an actual populator. So what we want to think through all the different cases. We want to think through if there is no group kind, it'll go through the regular process. If there is a group kind that doesn't match the regular ones, but it does match a data populator, we don't need to emit a message here or in the populator controller, because the actual populator should respond to that and generate an event saying, I am populating this volume now, and all the future feedback should come from that populator. And if there's a data source group kind that is not a snapshot or a PVC, and it doesn't match any populator, then the populator controller will just emit that event that says there is no populator installed, and this PVC might not ever bind.
Who is going to emit that one? If there's no populator installed, I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
My new code, the populator.
Yeah, that is. But what if that's not what if that's not there? So are you saying this will always be there? This populator controller will always be running?
The intention is this populator controller or data source controller, or what we call it, should always exist, much like the central snapshot controller should always exist. And you'll get this message here. If it's not valid, you'll get the data source for this PVC does not match any registered.
So this controller, did we say that we will have this, or this is just a POC? Because if it's central controller, it should not be part of external provisioner, actually. External provisioner is not a central controller, it's a sidecar, right?
So that is a separate discussion that we need to have, but yes, this new code
so if that's the case, then there is a possibility it
controller.
won't be installed, just the same problem as the snapshot controller, right? So if it's always part of external provisioner, then I think we know that since you have external provisioner, it will be there. But they're separate.
It's not meant to be part of the sidecar, because
I know. That's what I'm saying. So we can't make that assumption that it will always be there. So I think we still need to have some message saying that it will be handled by someone or something. Some message there saying that, because we are not 100% sure this central controller will be there.
Well, I think that is something I would dispute. The central controller needs to be there.
I know, but
the right
possible that's not installed. So that's why we do need to have that message saying that it will be handled by, so at least the user will see, okay.
The problem is that it may or may not be handled. So the only thing that the sidecar knows is that it isn't going to do the job.
Right, so you need to have a message, right?
If there's a provisioner, it will do the job, but if there isn't, nothing's going to do the job. And so
it needs to have a message there. It's the same thing. I'm just saying that we should handle this the same way as the entry PV controller does. PV controller has a message saying, okay, waiting for external something, external plugin to do something. I can find that message. I think we should have something like that.
Yeah. We can have a message. What I want to emphasize is that as long as the right thing has happened and the populator controller is installed, you will always get two messages. Either you'll get the message from the external provisioner sidecar saying, you know, I'm not going to do anything, and then the populator controller saying nobody's going to do anything, or you'll get the external provisioner sidecar saying I'm not going to do anything, and then you'll get the populator controller saying I am handling this. And so you'll always get two messages in the good case. And you're right that somebody's going to screw up and not install the populator controller, especially in the immediate term. But like the goal is that in the long term, it is always installed. And I think it's acceptable that if someone doesn't install it, that they just don't get feedback, and then that's on them for failing to install it correctly. I don't want to. I don't know.
I just think that this is, we have a similar problem already, right? I just think.
Yeah. So okay. So we. Yeah, I'm not opposed to having some kind of message. I guess we can maybe update this message because it's not literally waiting. It's just not handling it, and maybe we can quibble on the exact wording of the message offline. But yeah, I don't want the external provisioner to presume that there is a populator. It's just that if the populator is present, it will handle it, and if not, you'll get another message telling you that there is no populator and that it's not going to get handled. But the external provisioner is saying I'm done with this volume. I'm not going to look at it anymore. So yeah, as long as we're in agreement about that, yeah, I can update this message, and I can change the error that gets returned to be one of those ignored errors, so that the right logging occurs in the parent or the caller of this method, and then maybe we'll be in better shape. Does that sound good?
Yeah, we can sort out the details offline. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I will then do another turn on that PR for that bug fix, because that's actually having this bug causes a panic today where the whole thing just crashes, which is not what we intend, obviously.
Yeah.
So we'll try to get that fixed quickly, and then yeah, I'll go around and work on all the rest of it, and then just to pop back up to the top level, my main work then, aside from fixing these bugs and maybe changing the names of things, is going to be to continue to work on the hello populator, splitting it into a reusable library component and then a sample that sits on top of that. And I'm anticipating I'm going to run into problems splitting those apart, but I don't know what they are yet. And so I'm just sort of crossing my fingers and hoping that it goes well. But if I do run into problems, we could discuss them next week. And that's all I have for today. So anything else from anybody? Where's my agenda doc? Here it is. Anything else? If not, we'll end the meeting, and I'll type up some notes on here and get back to working on these bugs.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys.